Let me tell you something that may explain why today feels strangely intense. Because the atmosphere around you is not asking for a casual reaction. It is pushing you toward a deeper internal shift. The moon, moving into Sagittarius this morning, might appear ordinary at first glance, especially because the moon changes zodiac signs every few days. But the meaning of this particular movement becomes much stronger when you consider the planetary activity surrounding it and the aspects forming at the same time. This is not simply a moon sign change happening in isolation. It is one piece of a larger sequence, and that sequence creates a narrow and unusually powerful opening for movement, opportunity, and change. For Sagittarius, Leo, and Aries, this deserves special attention because this period may feel less like another ordinary day and more like a point where circumstances begin redirecting themselves. But before that more fortunate opening becomes available, there is an uncomfortable stage that has to come first. You may already recognize it in the way your emotions have felt heavier than usual, in the strange restlessness you cannot explain, or in the sense that something inside you is unsettled even when nothing obvious has changed around you. That feeling is part of the story. There is a reason it has been difficult to simply brush it aside, and understanding that reason changes the way you experience everything that follows. Tonight, the focus turns toward the first quarter, Moon in Scorpio, and Scorpio energy rarely allows you to remain comfortably on the surface of your own life. It has a way of turning your attention toward whatever has been buried underneath your usual routines and defenses. Old fears can suddenly become noticeable. Questions around trust can return. Unresolved struggles involving control, emotional power, attachment, or vulnerability may become impossible to ignore. It can feel as though something inside you has opened a hidden drawer and placed everything you thought you had already handled directly in front of you. But this does not mean you are moving backward. The first quarter phase itself represents a moment in the lunar cycle when the intentions established during the new moon encounter their first meaningful resistance. What began with possibility now has to meet reality. And that becomes especially important because the new moon earlier this month was not an ordinary new moon. It was a solar eclipse in Leo, occurring around August 12th. Whatever was awakened, initiated, exposed, or set into motion in your life around that time now reaches a point where friction becomes part of the process. You may have sensed that something new was beginning, even if you could not yet describe it clearly. Perhaps there was a decision you felt ready to make, a desire that suddenly became stronger, or an awareness that you could no longer remain the same person simply because the old version of your life was familiar. Now, the first quarter moon asks you to confront what stands between that emerging chapter and the person you are becoming. This is why the emotional weight can feel so personal. It may seem as though your mind is searching for a reason to be uncomfortable, but the deeper process is more purposeful than that. The pressure is revealing what cannot accompany you forward. Attachments that have already completed their purpose may become more obvious. Emotional habits that once protected you may now feel restrictive. The tendency to make yourself smaller in order to avoid conflict, disappointment, rejection, or uncertainty may suddenly become difficult to tolerate. You may realize that some of the things you called patience were actually fear. Some of the things you called loyalty were attachment, and some of the things you called safety were simply familiarity. That realization can hurt, but it can also be liberating. Scorpio does not clear the surface first and ask questions later. It takes you toward the emotional root, because transformation becomes difficult when you continue carrying what you have already outgrown. Think about the experience of trying to walk into a new room while refusing to put down a bag filled with everything from the room you just left. Eventually, the weight becomes the problem. The doorway is not the problem. The next chapter is not the problem. What you are carrying is. That is the deeper symbolism of this Scorpio clearing. It is not here to punish you for having emotions, and it is not evidence that something has gone wrong. It is showing you what needs to be released, so that expansion does not require you to drag your old identity behind you. Even if the process feels emotionally turbulent, there is a distinction worth remembering. Turbulence suggests meaningless instability. Clearing suggests purposeful movement. Tonight is much closer to the second. Your emotional system may be reacting before your conscious mind fully understands why, which is why you may feel unusually sensitive, reflective, impatient, or unable to settle. Something within you recognizes that a transition is underway and that recognition can arrive before the external evidence appears. Then, immediately following this Scorpio clearing, the energy shifts again, only minutes after the first quarter. Moon tonight. The Sun in Leo forms a perfect trine with Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius, adding another layer to what is already unfolding. Black Moon Lilith is not a planet. It is a mathematical point, and within astrology it symbolizes the part of the psyche that resists being controlled, edited, softened, or forced into an acceptable shape. It represents the wild and uncompromising part of you that does not want to live according to rules that require you to betray yourself. It can point toward the desires you were taught, to suppress the opinions you learned, to silence the intensity you were told was excessive, and the aspects of your personality that made other people uncomfortable because they could not easily categorize or control them. This is where the story becomes deeply personal, because the question is no longer simply, what are you releasing? The deeper question becomes, what part of yourself are you finally allowing to exist without apology? And that question leads directly into the next layer of this powerful sequence. There is a part of you that may have been hidden for so long that you almost forgot how powerful it could be. And tonight, that part is being brought much closer to the surface. Black Moon. Lilith speaks to the qualities within you that others may have labeled as excessive, unconventional, difficult, intense, or simply too honest. It represents the side of your nature that does not naturally conform just because conformity makes everyone else more comfortable. Now place that energy beside the Sun in Leo, the symbol of your conscious identity, your sense of self, your ego, and the person you knowingly choose to become. Tonight, these two forces form a perfect trine, creating an unusually smooth relationship between your visible identity and the deeper parts of yourself that you may have spent years editing. What makes this especially striking is how precise the aspect is. The orb is barely 1/10 of a degree, bringing the alignment extremely close to exact, almost precise to the minute. That level of closeness matters within the symbolism of this transit, because it emphasizes the feeling that these two energies are meeting with very little distance between them. You are not being asked to force yourself into authenticity. You are being given an opening where authenticity can feel natural. Imagine spending years adjusting your voice, depending on who is in the room, softening your opinions so nobody becomes uncomfortable, hiding your ambitions because they might appear too bold, or questioning your own instincts because someone else once told you that you were asking for too much. Then suddenly, something changes inside you. You realize you no longer want to spend so much energy managing how other people perceive you. You stop rehearsing explanations before speaking. You stop wondering whether your confidence will make someone else uncomfortable. You begin to recognize that being fully yourself does not require permission from everyone around you. That is the deeper meaning of this Sun and Lilith connection. It can feel like receiving an invisible authorization to stop separating yourself into acceptable pieces and unacceptable pieces. The polished version of you does not have to disappear, but it no longer needs to be the only version people are allowed to see. The ambitious part, the passionate part, the intense part, the opinionated part, and the unconventional part can exist alongside the softer parts without contradiction. And the beautiful thing about a trine is that it does not normally demand this integration through conflict. Unlike a tense aspect that can force awareness through pressure, a trine tends to create movement with greater ease. That means the qualities you once believed needed to be controlled may suddenly become the very qualities that make you compelling. Instead of feeling embarrassed by your intensity, you may begin to understand it as conviction. Instead of interpreting your independence as a problem, you may see it as strength. Instead of hiding your unusual perspective, you may realize that your difference is precisely what makes your perspective valuable. This can also explain a subtle change you may have noticed over the last few days. Perhaps you have not become louder, but you have become steadier. Maybe you're talking less about proving yourself and feeling more comfortable, simply occupying your own space. There is a particular kind of confidence that does not need an audience to validate it. It is quiet because it is no longer negotiating with itself. When that kind of confidence appears, other people often sense it before you even say anything. They may become more curious about you. They may listen more carefully. They may respond differently because you are no longer presenting yourself through hesitation and constant self-correction. That shift is important because the opportunity arriving today is not designed for the version of you that remains frozen by the need to be safe, agreeable, or perfectly understood. The opening becomes meaningful when you bring your complete identity into it, including the characteristics that do not fit neatly into expectations. Then the energy changes again, and this is where the larger sequence begins to reveal why the timing matters so much. This morning, the moon crosses from Scorpio into Sagittarius at 4:30 at night on Thursday, August 20th, marking the transition from one emotional landscape into another. Think back to where the moon has just been. Its passage through Scorpio has carried the atmosphere into deeper psychological territory, encouraging emotional excavation and bringing hidden material closer to awareness. It can feel like spending several days underground, moving through rooms of the mind that you normally avoid, confronting memories, fears, attachments, and feelings that are easier to ignore when life stays busy. Then Sagittarius arrives, and the symbolic atmosphere becomes dramatically wider. The contrast is almost like emerging from a confined underground space and suddenly standing beneath an enormous open sky. Scorpio pulls inward. Sagittarius looks outward. Scorpio investigates what lies beneath the surface. Sagittarius wants to know what exists beyond the current horizon. It is associated with exploration, philosophy, possibility, and the instinct to ask what else might be waiting beyond what you already know. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, which is traditionally connected with luck, expansion, growth, and abundance. So the moon entering this sign changes the emotional tone from concentrated intensity toward greater openness and possibility. You may notice the heaviness beginning to loosen. Thoughts can become more optimistic. Your emotional field may feel less trapped inside immediate problems and more interested in what could happen next. There can be a renewed willingness to move, experiment, take a chance, or consider a possibility that seemed unrealistic while the emotional atmosphere was heavier. But there is more happening than simply feeling better. Once the moon enters Sagittarius, it begins forming a trine with Jupiter in Leo, creating another flowing connection between fire signs. Jupiter has been in Leo since late June, amplifying themes connected with creative expression, confidence, personal visibility, and the courage to occupy the spotlight rather than hide from it. Jupiter tends to enlarge whatever it touches, so its influence in Leo can make questions of self-expression and personal confidence feel much more significant. When the Sagittarius moon connects with Jupiter in Leo, emotional openness meets expansive confidence. The desire to explore meets the willingness to be seen. Curiosity meets courage. The result can feel like an internal green light, as though the emotional hesitation that previously kept you standing at the edge begins to weaken. Fire connecting with fire does not need to be dragged forward through force. The symbolism suggests movement, that feels more natural because the energies understand one another. This is why the timing of the opportunity matters. The emotional clearing associated with Scorpio has already exposed what was weighing you down. The Sun and Lilith connection has strengthened the relationship between your conscious identity and the parts of yourself you once tried to hide. Then Sagittarius arrives and asks you to use that newly recovered freedom. The message becomes much simpler. Do not remain standing at the doorway after everything inside you has already prepared to leave. Move toward the possibility that now feels available. Take the step that requires trust. Allow yourself to act before you have every detail guaranteed. What people often call luck can sometimes feel like a mysterious external force, but in this sequence it can also be understood as timing, meeting readiness. The opportunity becomes easier to recognize because the internal obstacles have already been brought into awareness. The fear has been examined. The identity has been reclaimed. The emotional weight has begun to loosen. Now the horizon opens. But even when momentum becomes powerful, movement still needs awareness, because the same fire that gives you courage can also make you move faster than your judgment. And that is why the next part of this story introduces an important guardrail you will need to understand before you act. Before you decide that this is simply a moment to follow every impulse and chase every possibility in front of you, there is one more influence you need to understand. Because this period is not designed to remove every obstacle from your path, there is another force moving through the same window, and its purpose is not to stop your progress, but to make sure your progress has something strong enough to support it. On August 21st, one day after the moon moves into Sagittarius, Venus in Libra forms a perfect opposition to Saturn in Aries. What makes this especially relevant to the energy around the 20th is that the opposition is already operating within a very tight orb on the 20th, which means its influence can overlap with the opening created by the Sagittarius Moon and Jupiter connection. You may therefore experience two very different sensations at almost the same time. One part of you may feel ready to move forward, expand, trust yourself, and embrace what appears possible, while another part of you may suddenly become much more cautious about what you are agreeing to, who you are trusting, and whether the opportunity in front of you can actually support the future you want. Venus represents love, values, relationships, connection, and money. Saturn represents structure, boundaries, responsibility, reality, and time. When Venus and Saturn stand opposite one another, the emotional excitement surrounding relationships, finances, and opportunities has to encounter the practical question of whether something is genuinely sustainable. This can feel uncomfortable precisely because the rest of the energy is encouraging movement. You may finally feel brave enough to say yes, and then immediately notice a detail that requires you to slow down. You may feel emotionally drawn towards someone while simultaneously recognizing that the relationship needs clearer boundaries. You may see an opportunity that looks attractive and realize that its actual foundation needs to be examined before you commit. At first, that interruption can feel frustrating. It can seem as though something has finally opened, and then another influence arrives to make you question it. But that interpretation misses the purpose of Saturn. Saturn is not necessarily taking the opportunity away. It is asking whether the opportunity can carry your weight once you step inside it. Think about the difference between seeing a beautiful building from the outside and checking whether the structure beneath it is actually strong. One experience is about appearance. The other is about durability. Venus can make something appealing, desirable, or emotionally meaningful, while Saturn asks whether that attraction has enough substance to survive time, responsibility, and reality. This distinction becomes especially important because the Sagittarius Moon and Jupiter in Leo can create a powerful feeling of confidence. You may suddenly believe that anything is possible. You may become more willing to trust, take chances, accept invitations, or pursue something that previously seemed beyond your reach. That optimism can be exactly what you need, especially if fear has kept you stationary for too long. But confidence without discernment can turn into impulsiveness. Expansion without boundaries can become excess. A leap can be courageous, but only if you understand where you are landing. That is why the Venus-Saturn opposition serves as a counterweight to the larger energy of this window. It places a practical voice beside the adventurous one. It asks you to examine the people involved, the commitments being offered, the financial implications, and the long-term structure beneath whatever is attracting your attention. You may find yourself recognizing that one partnership has genuine substance, while another only looks impressive from a distance. You may realize that an opportunity has real potential because its foundation is solid, while another is mostly excitement without enough support underneath it. You may even feel compelled to slow down and examine something you would normally accept immediately. Reading the agreement before signing it, asking the question you almost decided not to ask, checking the details instead of relying only on excitement. These are not signs that you have lost your momentum. They may be the very actions that protect it. The strongest expression of this period is therefore not blind optimism. It is the ability to combine enthusiasm with judgment. You can believe in the possibility while still examining the facts. You can be willing to leap while making sure the ground beneath you is not unstable. You can remain open without becoming careless. That balance may not feel comfortable. Saturn can feel like a sudden interruption when you are already experiencing freedom, confidence, and expansion. It can feel like someone has opened a window and then immediately reminded you that you still need to check the weather before walking outside. Yet that tension has value. The people who move through this window most effectively are not necessarily the ones who say yes to everything. They are the ones who recognize which yes deserves their energy and which yes would eventually create a burden. The courage comes from Sagittarius and Jupiter. The discernment comes from Saturn. Together, those qualities create something much stronger than either one alone. And Sagittarius, this distinction matters to you especially, because this entire sequence is touching your sign in an unusually direct way. The moon is moving into Sagittarius, your own sign, which means the shift is occurring in your personal territory. Before this happens, however, the moon has spent the previous couple of days traveling through Scorpio, activating your 12th house. This area of the chart is associated with the subconscious, hidden fears, and the internal material that operates behind the scenes of your awareness. That can explain why the preceding period may have felt emotionally dense or strangely private for you. You may have been processing things that were difficult to explain to other people because the real movement was happening internally. Old fears may have surfaced. Thoughts you normally keep in the background may have become louder. You may have needed more solitude or felt as though you were confronting an invisible emotional weight. Then the moon enters Sagittarius, and the symbolism changes dramatically. For you, this can feel like finally coming up for air after spending time beneath the surface. The emotional atmosphere becomes more familiar, more expansive, and more connected to your natural instinct to move toward possibility. It can feel like an internal reset, a restoration of emotional energy after a period of psychological processing. But this is not simply another moon transit through your sign, because your ruling planet Jupiter is currently in Leo, in your 9th house. The 9th house has a natural connection with Sagittarius and governs higher education, international connections, publishing, broadcasting, and your broader philosophy of life. That creates an unusually meaningful relationship between your identity, your ruler, and the area of life associated with expansion and wider horizons. Your ruling planet is in Leo, a sign that supports confidence, creative expression, and visibility, while occupying your 9th house, an area closely connected with the themes Sagittarius naturally represents. When the moon enters your 1st house this morning, it forms a trine directly to Jupiter in your 9th house. This is where the potential for a breakthrough becomes particularly clear. Something connected with education could move unexpectedly in your favor. You might receive acceptance into an academic program that you were uncertain about. An opportunity involving travel, relocation, or an international connection could appear in a way you did not anticipate. Something you have written, created, published, or broadcast could suddenly receive attention beyond the level you expected. Or the breakthrough may happen internally, through a philosophical realization that finally dissolves an obstacle you have been carrying for months. The important point is that the opening does not require you to become someone else. In fact, the opposite may be true. The Sun and Lilith trine re-examined earlier becomes especially meaningful because Black Moon Lilith is currently in Sagittarius, your sign. The qualities that make you unconventional, independent, intense, outspoken, or unwilling to fit neatly into someone else's expectations may be directly connected to the opportunities opening for you. You are not being asked to become safer, quieter, or more acceptable in order to receive this moment. The message is almost the reverse. Your greatest opening may come when you stop filtering away the qualities that make you unmistakably yourself. The more honestly you embody your own nature, the more clearly you may recognize the doors that are actually meant for you. And that leads directly into the next sign, whose experience of this window becomes just as significant. There is something deeply significant about what is happening for Sagittarius right now, because the very qualities that may have made you feel different, misunderstood, or unwilling to follow the expected path may be exactly what creates your opening. Your refusal to become someone else simply to fit a particular mold is not being treated as a weakness in this moment. It is becoming part of your strength. And that brings us to Leo, because for you the energy does not simply arrive gently, it catches fire. If you are a Leo, you have probably already noticed that this year carries a different scale from what you're accustomed to. Jupiter has been moving through your sign since late June, and its influence has been building around your identity, your confidence, your visibility, and your sense that life is beginning to expand beyond the limits you previously accepted. You may have noticed yourself thinking bigger, imagining more, or becoming less willing to remain hidden in situations where you once tolerated being overlooked. That does not happen by accident within this symbolism. Jupiter enlarges whatever area of life it touches, and for Leo, its presence in your first house has been steadily increasing the volume around who you are and how you present yourself to the world. But I do not think the full effect of that expansion has arrived yet. It has been gathering. Picture a reservoir slowly filling over time. You may not notice every drop entering it, but eventually there is enough stored energy that even one small spark can create a dramatic change. That is how I see the Sagittarius Moon interacting with Jupiter for you today. The Moon enters Sagittarius and moves through your fifth house, an area naturally associated with Leo themes. This house governs creativity, romance, joy, children, and speculative risk. So the emotional atmosphere created by the Moon is moving directly through territory where your natural instincts already know how to operate. This is why the energy can feel unusually familiar and motivating. You are not trying to force yourself into a foreign emotional landscape. Instead, the transit is activating areas connected with expression, pleasure, courage, creativity, and the willingness to take a meaningful chance. Then the Moon, in your fifth house, forms a trine to Jupiter in your first house, creating a flowing connection between what you create and who you are. That can be a powerful combination. An idea that has been sitting quietly inside your mind may suddenly reveal its missing piece. A creative project may move from something you privately imagine into something you are finally willing to show people. A romantic situation may develop with surprising momentum and carry the feeling that events are aligning more naturally than expected. A speculative risk could also produce an outcome that exceeds what you initially anticipated. If you have been developing something for a long time, This is the kind of atmosphere where the effort already invested can suddenly receive an additional push. Think about a project that has been moving slowly because you are waiting for the right audience, the right inspiration, the right opportunity, or simply the confidence to let it be seen. The project itself may not be entirely new. What changes is the momentum surrounding it. The same can apply to a relationship that has gradually become more meaningful, or to a personal desire that you have been reluctant to acknowledge because pursuing it would require you to become more visible. The fifth house. Moon encourages emotional participation in life rather than passive observation, while Jupiter in your first house magnifies the importance of your own identity within that process. You may feel more willing to take the chance because you are beginning to trust the person taking it. At the same time, the Venus-Saturn opposition provides an important filter for this expansion. For Leo, this opposition falls across your 3rd and 9th house axis, bringing communication, information, learning, broader beliefs, and long-term commitments into the same conversation as your growing creative and romantic momentum. This means that while your enthusiasm may be increasing, your ability to recognize which conversations, ideas, promises, and commitments deserve your attention is also becoming more important. You may find yourself noticing subtle differences in the way people respond to your ambitions. One person may genuinely encourage what you are building, while another may only be interested because they sense an opportunity to benefit from your momentum. One person may understand your vision even before it is fully formed, while another may constantly make you question whether the vision is worth pursuing. This does not mean you need to become suspicious of everyone around you. It means your expanding confidence can be accompanied by better discernment. The universe, within this symbolic framework, is not simply giving you more energy. It is giving you a way to recognize where that energy belongs. If you are a Leo, and you have been delaying a bold move, holding back a creative decision, hesitating to express what you actually want, or waiting for someone else to validate the direction you already know you want to take, this is the kind of moment that encourages movement. The question is not whether you can guarantee the outcome. The question is whether you are willing to participate in your own possibility. And then we arrive at Aries, where the story takes a different shape. For Aries, the breakthrough is less obvious because it is connected to pressure that has been building for a long time. Saturn has been in your sign, and if your recent experience has felt like trying to construct something solid while circumstances keep changing underneath you, that reflects the symbolism of Saturn. This energy is slow. It requires patience. It asks for discipline, responsibility, structure, and endurance. It does not reward shortcuts simply because you are tired of waiting. You may have felt as though every accomplishment required more effort than it should have, or as though you were being forced to strengthen foundations that you would rather have ignored. There has been nothing effortless about this process, yet the very pressure that made the journey difficult may now become the platform from which you move forward. Jupiter is currently in Leo, in your 5th house, bringing expansion to creativity, self-expression, and the willingness to take calculated chances. At the same time, the Sagittarius Moon travels through your 9th house, the area associated with expansion, global vision, higher learning, legal recognition, and broader horizons. These two fire sign influences form a trine, creating a connection between what you are willing to create and the larger world you are trying to reach. This is why the opportunity for Aries does not necessarily look like random luck arriving from nowhere. It can look more like accumulated effort, finally encountering the right opening. Something you have been developing may suddenly reach people outside your immediate circle. A creative endeavor you have been investing in could receive international attention, legal backing, or formal recognition. A business that has taken a long time to establish may suddenly catch a wave of momentum that carries it into a completely different level. The important detail is that the groundwork comes first. Saturn has demanded the work, and now the Sagittarius Moon and Jupiter connection can provide the movement. But there is another layer that may initially confuse you. Venus is opposing Saturn across your 1st and 7th house axis, which places your identity and personal direction opposite partnerships and significant one-to-one connections. Because of this, your breakthrough may not immediately feel like a victory. It could initially resemble a loss. You may reach a point where a partnership, whether personal or professional, has become too heavy to continue carrying. You may have to make a decision about a business relationship, personal connection, or agreement that has been weighing on you for longer than you wanted to admit. And the strange part is that ending it may feel painful, even if it is ultimately freeing. Sometimes the first sign that something is no longer aligned is not relief, it is fear. You know you should move forward, but you are afraid of what will happen when the familiar connection disappears. Yet Aries is being asked to consider whether sharing a burden is actually helping when the other person is not carrying their portion of it. Your discipline, your structural integrity, and the work you have completed independently may already be enough. The lesson is not that every partnership must end. The lesson is that the right partnership should not require you to continually compensate for someone else's lack of effort. If a connection has been limiting your development, creating instability, or forcing you to carry responsibilities that should be shared, releasing it may create the space necessary for the next stage of your life. The opening may therefore arrive through subtraction before it arrives through addition. Something leaves, and the space created by that departure becomes available for something more aligned. That is why the Aries version of luck may feel surprising. It may not arrive as an obvious prize. It may arrive as freedom. Now, none of this means that everyone outside Sagittarius, Leo, and Aries is excluded from the larger energy. The Sagittarius Moon changes the emotional atmosphere collectively, so everyone can experience some version of the increased optimism, broader perspective, and willingness to consider possibilities that previously seemed too distant. The feeling of looking beyond the immediate problem and imagining a larger future is not limited to the 3 highlighted signs. The broader message of this entire sequence can be understood through the relationship between 4 influences. The Sun and Lilith trine emphasizes authenticity. The Sagittarius Moon encourages courage and movement. Jupiter in Leo amplifies confidence and possibility. Venus, opposing Saturn, introduces judgment, boundaries, and practical awareness. When these qualities are held together, the result is not reckless optimism. It is a much more mature form of confidence. You can take action without abandoning your ability to think. You can be bold without becoming careless. You can want more without pretending that every opportunity is automatically right for you. So if there is an idea, conversation, decision, or leap that has been occupying your mind, the next couple of days may feel especially important. This does not mean acting without consideration. It means allowing the inner work you have already done to inform your next move. You have spent time identifying what no longer belongs to you. You have been encouraged to recognize who you are without constantly editing yourself for other people. Now the question becomes whether you can act from that clearer version of yourself. Because I keep returning to the same idea. Luck does not always look like something falling from the sky. Sometimes it is the result of clearing enough emotional weight that you can finally recognize the opening that was already there. Sometimes it is the moment. Preparation meets timing. Sometimes it is the courage to move after fear has stopped controlling the decision. That is what this window represents. Space has been created, but you still have to decide whether you will enter it. And if today has felt strangely heavy, emotional, restless, or difficult to understand, do not immediately assume that something is wrong. The Scorpio moon is part of the process, and its role is to bring old material upward so it can be recognized rather than unconsciously carried forward. Let the emotions surface. Let yourself notice what they are showing you. Let the old attachments reveal themselves without automatically deciding that they still belong in your future. Then, as the moon shifts into Sagittarius this morning, pay attention to the change in emotional atmosphere. You may notice greater openness, more curiosity, or a stronger desire to move toward something instead of continuing to analyze what has already happened. Give yourself permission to occupy more space. Say the thing you have been afraid to say when saying it is genuinely necessary. Take the meaningful step you have been postponing. Allow yourself to acknowledge that you want more, provided you are willing to pursue that desire with awareness. The deepest message here is not that you need to become perfect before the opportunity arrives. It is that you need to become honest enough with yourself to recognize what is actually yours to pursue. The universe, within the symbolism of this sequence, is not demanding perfection from you. It is asking for authenticity, courage, and discernment. The opening is there, and the final decision belongs to you. If you stayed through this entire message, thank you for being here. If what you heard reflected something you have been experiencing, consider subscribing if you want more content like this, and share your experience in the comments. Tell me whether the emotional heaviness has been showing up for you today, whether you are one of the 3 signs discussed here, and what you are considering moving forward with. Your experiences can add another perspective to this conversation, and this community grows through those shared reflections. Take care of yourself tonight. Allow the emotional clearing to happen without fighting it, and pay attention to what changes when the energy opens. I will see you in the next one.